Captain Elias Gray stood at the foot of the great marble steps, his eyes fixed on the towering doors of the Tharkesh Palace. The air around him was heavy with strange incense that burned in tall golden bowls. The alien guards, each one scaled, and armored like walking statues, stood with long spears that glimmered in the light. Their eyes, bright and unblinking, followed his every movement. Elias adjusted the collar of his dark blue uniform and tried to steady his breathing. He had been sent as a human envoy, carrying Earth's request for trade and peaceful contact with the Tharkesh Dominion. For humanity, this meeting was history in the making. For him, it felt like stepping into the mouth of a storm. When the palace doors opened, a hush fell over the wide courtyard. Inside stretched a hall of stone and crystal, high enough to make even the guards seem small. The walls shimmered with carvings that showed ancient battles, empires rising and falling, rivers of fire and oceans of stars. Elias walked carefully, guided by two attendants. His boots clicked on the polished floor, but even that small sound felt too loud in such a place. The court was already gathered, filling both sides of the long hall. Dozens of alien nobles in robes of deep red and gold watched him with eyes sharp as blades. Some whispered to each other. Others leaned back in disdain as if a human did not belong here. At the far end of the hall sat the throne, a massive seat of black stone veined with silver. Upon it rested the Empress of the Tharkesh. She was tall, her scaled skin glistening like burnished bronze, her crown rising high in jagged peaks. Her gaze alone carried the weight of command, and even the guards around her stood straighter when she looked their way. Elias felt his throat tighten. He had faced war councils before, even stared down hostile fleets, but the eyes of the Empress carried a power he had never known. He walked forward and bowed low, careful to follow the ritual he had studied for weeks. His voice was steady, though his heart pounded. He introduced himself as a servant of humanity, a messenger of peace and a guest seeking friendship. The Empress listened, silent, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she raised one clawed hand, and the hall grew even quieter. Her voice was calm yet deep, echoing from the walls. She spoke of the Dominion's strength, its long rule, and its cautious eye toward newcomers. Elias bowed again, waiting for her final word. But instead of ending the ceremony, the Empress rose from her throne. With slow steps, she descended toward the center of the hall. The crowd stirred. Behind her came attendants, and among them was a small figure. At first, Elias thought it was another noble child, perhaps part of the tradition. But as the figure stepped into the light, he realized it was the heir of the Empress. The child was small, no higher than Elias's chest, his scales softer and lighter, almost shimmering blue. His eyes were wide and uncertain, but curious. The attendants guided him forward, and the Empress introduced him in her language, naming him as the heir of the throne and future ruler of the Dominion. Elias bowed once more, lowering his head in respect. It was then that the air shifted. The child broke from the attendants and walked closer, tilting his head as if studying Elias's face. The court held its breath. The boy's small claws clutched Elias's sleeve. For a long, fragile moment, they simply looked at each other. And then, in a soft but clear voice, the child spoke a single word. It was not in the alien tongue. It was in English. The boy said, "Father." The sound echoed in the vast hall. For an instant, silence swallowed everything. Elias froze. His mind could not process what he had just heard. Did the child truly speak his language? Did he say that word? Around him, whispers erupted like a wave. The nobles gasped, their voices rising in confusion. Guards stepped forward, their spears lowering. Some shouted, others hissed. The attendants reached for the child, but he clung tighter to Elias's uniform, his voice louder now. "Father!" The Empress's face hardened, her eyes burning with sudden fire. The court was no longer silent. It was a storm. Some shouted accusations of insult. Others murmured about forbidden omens. Elias felt every eye stab into him like a blade. He opened his mouth to deny, to explain, but no words came. He had never seen this child before. He had no connection here, no secret past. And yet the boy's gaze was steady, filled with something Elias could not name, longing, perhaps, or recognition. The guards closed in. Elias raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. Still the child pressed against him, refusing to let go. Elias felt the boy's small hands trembling against his sleeve, but his voice was firm when he repeated the word again, softer this time, but certain. Father. In that moment, the palace of the Tharkesh stood still. The ceremony was broken, the rituals forgotten. A single word had shattered the order of the hall. Elias Gray, envoy of humanity, stood in the center of a storm he had not created, with an alien child clinging to him and an empire staring in disbelief. He did not yet know what it meant, but he felt in his bones that this one word would change everything for him, for the boy, and perhaps for all of humanity. The sound of the child's voice still hung in the air, but the hall was already erupting. The nobles of the Tharkesh court shouted in fury, their scaled hands pointing at the human envoy. Some hissed curses, others demanded punishment. The yell. Empress raised her hand to silence them, but even her command could not calm the storm completely. The word father had shaken the palace in a way no army could. Elias stood frozen, his body tense as guards moved closer. Their spears gleamed in the light, tips so sharp they could pierce steel. The child still clung to his sleeve, his voice trembling now, but still repeating the word. Elias looked down at the boy and saw fear in his wide eyes, but also a desperate need. The guards did not dare to touch the air, but they circled Elias with suspicion. The Empress spoke, her tone sharp enough to cut stone. She demanded an explanation, her voice booming across the chamber. The translators whispered hurriedly into Elias's ear, but he already understood her meaning. She wanted to know how this child, her heir, could call a human envoy father. She wanted to know what trick, what insult, what scheme had been placed upon her court. Elias swallowed hard. He bowed low, his voice steady though his heart raced. He swore he had never met this child before, never stepped foot in the Dominion until this mission. He spoke of Earth's peaceful goals and denied any hidden plots. But his words felt weak, against the eyes of hundreds of nobles, each one staring at him as if he carried poison. The Empress's eyes narrowed, her golden crown casting long shadows across her face. She signaled, and one of her advisors stepped forward. The aliens, robe dragged across the polished floor as he announced what many had already whispered. Lineage was sacred among the Tharkesh. A child's words could not be dismissed as simple mistakes. To call a stranger father before the court was not only strange, it was dangerous. The nobles began arguing. Some claimed Elias must have secretly corrupted the air with human influence. Others suggested omens or curses. A few whispered about shame, dishonor, and weakness. The noise grew louder until the Empress struck the floor with her staff, and silence fell again. Elias took a step back, but the child tightened his grip on him. The boy's claws were small but sharp enough to pierce cloth. His voice came once more, softer this time, but clear. Father. Elias's chest tightened. He wanted to say something comforting, but he could not even understand why this was happening. He met the boy's gaze, and for the briefest second he saw something familiar there, something almost human. The Empress ordered the attendants to bring the boy away, but he resisted, clinging tighter to Elias. The guards hesitated, unsure how far they could go against the air. The child's defiance only made the whispers louder. Some nobles hissed that the boy was tainted. Others said he was chosen for something greater. Elias stood in the middle, feeling the weight of every stare pressing down on him. Finally, the Empress gave a new command. The matter would not be settled by shouting or denial. There would be proof. The Dominion science was advanced, and they would test the boy's blood. They would test Elias as well. If there was no connection, then Elias would walk free, though his presence might still stain the court. If there was truth in the child's words, then the storm would grow even darker. The guards surrounded Elias, not striking him, but ensuring he could not move without their blades ready. The Empress ended the gathering with a voice that carried finality. She declared that until the test was complete, Elias was not a guest, but a prisoner of honor. The nobles protested, but none dared argue against her decree. Elias was escorted out of the hall, the boy still clinging to him. Only when the attendants promised they would not harm him did the child let go, his wide eyes never leaving Elias's face. As the doors closed behind them, the boy whispered the word once more, almost like a plea. Elias heard it in his mind. Long after the sound had faded, they led him through winding corridors into a chamber with high windows and gilded walls. It was richly furnished but clearly locked from the outside. 2 guards stood at the door, their spears crossed. Elias sat on the edge of the bed, his hand shaking slightly as he replayed the scene in his mind. He had prepared for diplomacy, for speeches, for bargaining. He had not prepared for a child to call him father in front of an empire. Tiuam, boy's face stayed in his thoughts. There had been no doubt in his voice, no hesitation. Elias could not explain it, yet he felt the weight of it deep inside. He remembered stories from old human history, of kings brought down by claims of illegitimate heirs, of wars started over a single word. He realized the same danger now hung over him and over Earth itself. As night fell outside the palace windows, Elias looked at the stars and wondered how far back this secret stretched. He thought of old records, of human ships that had vanished in deep space decades ago. Could there have been contact before him, something Earth never learned about? He did not know. But he knew one thing clearly. Tomorrow, the test would come. And whatever truth it revealed, nothing in the palace or in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The next morning came with a cold stillness. Sunlight poured through the tall crystal windows of the chamber where Elias was kept, painting the floor with shifting colors. He had barely slept. All night he had replayed the child's voice in his head, the word father spoken again and again. It was not just the word itself, but the certainty with which the boy had said it. Elias had told himself there must be a mistake, but deep inside he wondered if there was more. The sound of heavy footsteps broke his thoughts. The door opened, and 2 guards entered, their spears angled but not threatening. Behind them came an attendant in a long silver robe, carrying a small device that glowed faintly in his hands. The attendant bowed slightly, though his eyes did not hide suspicion. He explained in formal words that the Empress had ordered a genetic test. They would take samples from Elias and from the child. The results would reveal the truth. Elias nodded calmly, though his stomach twisted. He had nothing to hide, and yet he felt uneasy. He remembered stories of human expeditions lost in deep space decades ago, missions shrouded in mystery. If one of those explorers had been captured or stranded here, could it explain the strange connection? He pushed the thought aside as the attendant pressed the device gently against his arm. A small sting and the sample was taken. The guards watched every movement, their eyes unblinking. Later that day, Elias was escorted to a private chamber, where the Empress awaited. The walls of the room were lined with banners and carvings, symbols of power and heritage. The Empress stood tall, her crown gleaming, while beside her stood the boy. The child's scales shimmered softly, and his gaze immediately found Elias. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, clutching Elias's hand as if he belonged there. The guards tensed, but the Empress raised her hand to hold them back. The attendant collected the boy's sample with the same device. The child did not flinch. He only stared at Elias with wide, curious eyes. When the attendant left to prepare the test, the room grew silent. The Empress studied Elias closely. Her voice was calm, but beneath it ran a current of steel. She asked, him again. Had he any secret contact with the Dominion before this day? Did humanity hide knowledge of the Tharkesh? Elias shook his head firmly. He swore on his honor as an envoy and as a soldier that he had never seen this world before. The Empress's gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Then she turned away, dismissing the guards for a moment of privacy. She spoke quietly, as though testing his reaction. The child had been different since birth, she admitted. His eyes, his frame, even his mind. None were like the other young of her people. She had kept him hidden from the court until now, waiting to see if his bloodline would cause trouble. And then, she said slowly, he called you father. Elias had no answer. The child pressed against his side, clutching his hand more tightly. For a brief second, Elias felt something stir in his chest. It was not proof, nor logic, but something closer to instinct. The boy did not look at him as an envoy or a stranger, but as someone who belonged in his world. When the attendant returned, he carried a crystal tablet glowing with alien script. He bowed and handed it to the Empress. She scanned the results, and for the first time Elias saw her expression falter. Her eyes widened slightly before narrowing again, as though she wished to hide her surprise. Slowly she raised her gaze to Elias, and her voice carried the weight of thunder. The test confirms it, she said. There is human blood in him. The word struck Elias harder than any blow. He stared at her, trying to understand. The nobles outside the chamber did not yet know, but when the truth spread, it would ignite the court like fire on dry grass. The Empress's jaw tightened as she dismissed the attendant. When they were alone again, she confessed the truth in fragments. Decades ago, before the Dominion acknowledged Earth's existence, there had been an incident. A human ship had strayed, too close to Tharkesh space. It was captured. Its crew was studied. Most perished, but one lived longer than the rest. The Empress's tone was careful, as though she revealed something dangerous even now. That human had been kept alive, and in time, something unexpected happened. He left behind a trace of himself, blood that now flowed in her child. Elias felt his breath catch. His mind raced. Could this be the missing explorer Earth had lost so long ago? If so, then humanity's history in the stars was deeper than anyone on Earth had ever known. The boy at his side was living proof. He was not fully Tharkesh, not fully human, but something new, something that bridged the two worlds. The child tugged at Elias's sleeve, pulling his thoughts back to the present. The boy's eyes were calm, filled with trust. He said the word once more, softer than before, but it carried more meaning now than ever. Father. Elias felt the weight of the galaxy press down on his shoulders. He had come here to speak of peace and trade, but instead he stood at the center of a secret that could break an empire or reshape it. The Empress's voice cut the silence again. She warned him that this truth could not be allowed to spread uncontrolled. Some nobles would call it shame. Others would see it as weakness. Civil war could erupt. Elias looked at the boy, then back, at the Empress. He understood the danger, but he also understood something else. Whatever the court decided, whatever storm was coming, he could not see this child as anything less than what he had already called him. A word spoken in innocence, but one that now bound them together. And deep inside, Elias knew the palace had only just begun to tremble. The chamber was quiet after the Empress finished speaking, but the silence felt heavy. Elias stood still, trying to gather his thoughts. The truth she had revealed was more than he had ever expected. A human had lived among the Tharkesh long, before Earth believed contact was made. That human's blood now flowed in the air of the Dominion. The boy's word father was not a mistake, not just a child's curiosity. It was instinct calling out to a part of himself that was human. The Empress paced slowly across the polished floor, her robes trailing behind her. Her voice was calm but filled with unease. She admitted she had raised the boy in secret, keeping his strange differences hidden from the wider court. His lighter scales, his unusual eyes, his softer frame, all had been signs that he was not fully Tharkesh. She had told herself it did not matter, but in her heart she feared the day when others would see the truth. That day had now come, and it had come with Elias standing in the center of her palace. Elias listened, his mind racing. He thought of Earth, of how this knowledge would shake his own people. A human explorer had vanished into the stars, only to leave behind a living legacy in the most powerful alien throne room in the galaxy. Humanity's first real contact was not only political, it was already written into blood. The child tugged at Elias's sleeve again. His eyes were wide and questioning, as though waiting for answers Elias did not yet have. For a moment, Elias knelt and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. He did not know why, but he felt compelled to reassure him. "You're not alone," he whispered softly, even though he knew the boy might not understand all his words. The child leaned closer, his small claws wrapping around Elias's hand. The Empress watched them, her expression torn between suspicion and something gentler. At last she spoke again. Her tone was sharper now, filled with warning. If the court learned the full truth, factions would rise. Some nobles would use the child's mixed blood as a weapon to seize power. Others would demand his removal from the line of succession. She could not allow the dominion to fracture, not when other alien empires watched for weakness. Elias straightened and met her gaze. "Then why tell me at all?" he asked. The Empress's eyes hardened. "Because," she said, "the boy had chosen him." Of all the beings in the hall, he had looked at Elias and spoken the word that shook the palace. The Empress could not ignore that choice. She needed to know whether Elias would use it as a weapon against her, or as something else. Elias thought carefully before he answered. He told her he had not come to exploit or deceive. He had come to represent humanity with honesty. But he also admitted that the boy's voice had touched something inside him he could not ignore. The Empress studied him silently, her golden eyes unblinking. A sudden sound at the door broke the moment. The guards returned with urgent expressions. Outside, the nobles were demanding answers. Rumors had already spread. The word "father" echoed through the corridors, retold by every courtier who had witnessed the ceremony. The Empress clenched her jaw. She had hoped to control the story, but it was already escaping her grasp. She ordered the guards to keep the boy hidden for now, away from the eyes of those who would seek to use him. Then she turned to Elias. She told him the situation had changed. He was no longer simply a guest or a prisoner. He was now a piece on the board of power, whether he wished it or not. His every word and action would decide not only his own fate, but the fate of the boy. Elias felt the weight of her words. He had come to the palace to speak of trade and peace, not to become tangled in dynasties and bloodlines. But he could not step away. Not when the child still looked at him with trust. Not when his very existence proved a secret that could topple an empire. That night, Elias was moved to another chamber, one less like a prison and more like a guest's quarters. But the guards outside were doubled, and he knew he was still being watched closely. Through the window, he could see the glowing lights of the alien city stretching far into the distance. Towers of crystal and stone rose like mountains, their lights blinking like stars. Somewhere in that city, whispers of the day's events were already spreading. As he sat alone, Elias thought of Earth again. How would his leaders react to this? Would they see the boy as hope or as danger? Would they try to claim him or fear him? He imagined the debates, the strategies, the plans, but all of that felt far away. Right now, the only reality was a child, who called him father, and an empire ready to break over it. The door creaked softly. Elias turned and saw the boy slipping inside, past the guards who must have allowed him entry under orders. The child padded across the floor and climbed onto the seat beside Elias. He said nothing at first, only rested his head against Elias's arm. Then, in the same soft tone as before, he whispered the word again. "Father." Elias felt his chest tighten. He knew the danger that word carried, but he also knew he could not turn away from it anymore. The boy had chosen him, and in some strange way, Elias realized he had chosen the boy as well. The Empress was right. The court would never be the same. The Dominion might never be the same. And perhaps after this, neither would humanity. The palace no longer felt steady. Whispers drifted through every hall like smoke, impossible to contain. The nobles had seen the child cling to Elias, and the word "father" was now on every tongue. By the next morning, rumors had grown wild. Some said Elias had bewitched the heir. Others claimed the Empress had hidden a terrible secret, one that shamed the Dominion. A few whispered about prophecy, saying perhaps the boy was chosen to bring a new age. From his guarded quarters, Elias could hear the unrest. The shuffle of armored feet was constant, and the voices of nobles rose and fell in heated argument. He had faced tense negotiations before, but never anything like this. He was no longer a guest envoy. He was at the center of a storm threatening to split an empire. The Empress summoned him again, this time to a council chamber smaller than the Grand Hall. The air there was thick with tension. Around the circular table sat several high-ranking nobles, each one cloaked in colors that marked their houses. Their eyes burned with suspicion, and some refused to even look at Elias. The Empress sat at the head, her crown gleaming under the light of crystal lamps. The boy sat beside her, but his eyes searched for Elias the moment he entered. The meeting began with accusations. A noble with deep crimson robes declared that the throne had been dishonored. Another slammed his clawed hand on the table, demanding the child be removed from succession. Others shouted for Elias to be punished, to be cast out, even executed. Their voices clashed like blades, each one trying to outshout the others. Elias stood silently, his jaw tight. He knew speaking too soon would make things worse. He waited until the Empress raised her staff, and the voices fell into uneasy silence. Then she spoke with authority. The test had proven truth, she told them. The child carried human blood. This fact could not be denied. The nobles shifted, some hissing in anger, others whispering nervously. One noble rose to his feet, his scaled face twisted in disgust. He declared that the Dominion could not be ruled by a tainted heir. He called for the child's removal, even his death, to protect the purity of the throne. The boy flinched and pressed closer to Elias, who instinctively stepped forward. His heart pounded, but his voice was calm as he spoke. He told the council that the boy was no threat, no weakness. He was proof of connection, proof that humanity and the Tharkesh were not so different. Some scoffed, others sneered, but a few remained quiet, their eyes thoughtful. Elias could see small cracks forming in the wall of outrage. He pressed further. Speaking of Earth's history, humanity, he said, had survived not because of strength alone, but because of bonds, families, tribes, nations. They endured because they protected their young even when the world called them weak. This child, Elias said firmly, is not a shame. He is hope. The chamber erupted again. Some nobles shouted in fury while others argued more quietly. The Empress did not stop them this time. She watched Elias carefully, her golden eyes sharp but unreadable. The boy clung to Elias's side, and for the first time the guards did not try to separate them. By the time the council ended, nothing was resolved. The nobles stormed out in groups, their voices carrying through the halls. Some plotted rebellion. Others muttered about possibility. The Empress dismissed everyone but Elias and her son. When they were alone, her mask of command slipped slightly. She admitted the court was breaking apart faster than she had feared. Civil war was not a distant threat. It was close, like fire already licking at the doors. Elias asked her what she planned to do. The Empress did not answer immediately. She studied him as though weighing a decision she had not yet made. Finally, she said the fate of the Dominion now balanced on choices made by very few. She could not protect her son from every dagger, not even within her own palace. Then her gaze locked onto Elias. She told him that whether he wished it or not, he was now part of this. The boy had chosen him. The court knew it. The galaxy would soon know it too. That night, Elias returned to his quarters, but rest did not come. He walked the floor, listening to the distant echoes of shouting in the palace. He imagined ships in orbit, fleets divided by loyalty or ambition. He thought of Earth, far away, and how his people would soon be drawn into this conflict, whether they were ready or not. The door opened quietly, and once again the boy slipped inside. The guards allowed it, perhaps under silent orders. The child carried a small carved figure, shaped from crystal, rough and simple but carefully made. He held it out to Elias with both hands. Elias took it gently, realizing it was a carving of two figures standing together, one tall, one small. The boy's eyes shone with a soft light, and he whispered the word again. "Father." Elias felt his chest tighten. He knew the palace was breaking, the nobles sharpening their claws for war. But when the boy leaned against him, he also knew he could not walk away. The Empress was right. He was part of this now, and if the child's safety meant standing against an empire, then Elias was ready. Outside, the palace was restless. Fires of rebellion were starting in whispers and shadows. The storm was coming. The palace had become a place of shadows. Nobles walked its halls with guarded faces, their voices low but sharp. Every corner seemed to hold whispers of rebellion. Rumors spread faster than truth, each one darker than the last. Some said the Empress would hide her heir forever. Others claimed she would cast the boy aside to save her throne. A few spoke of assassins already moving through the city. Elias felt the tension every moment. Guards followed his every step, not just to keep him under watch, but also to protect him. The Empress had made it clear, if he fell, the boy would follow and the empire might burn in full rebellion. He had never been so far from Earth, yet never felt so responsible for another life. The Empress summoned him again, but this time there was no council, no nobles. Only her, Elias, and the boy. The Empress stood near a tall window, the city lights glowing far below. She spoke without turning to him. The Dominion was close to tearing apart, she admitted. If she denied the boy, the nobles would see weakness. If she accepted him openly, many would see shame. Then she faced Elias, her eyes sharp. She told him he had a choice. He could walk away, renounce the child, and be escorted safely back to his people. Or he could accept the boy as his own before the court, claim him not by blood but by choice. If he chose the second path, he would become a shield, but also a target. Every faction would look to him, some with hope, others with hatred. Elias's chest tightened. The choice was heavy, but deep down he knew his answer. He looked at the boy who stood quietly by his side, watching with wide eyes. Elias knelt and rested a hand on the child's shoulder. "I won't deny him," he said firmly. "Not here, not anywhere." The Empress studied him in silence. For the first time, Elias thought he saw something like respect in her gaze. But there was also sorrow, as though she knew what this path would cost him. She nodded once, then told him to prepare. Tomorrow, he would stand before the court and speak his choice aloud. That night, Elias could not rest. He sat with the boy beside him, the carved crystal figure still in his hand. The palace outside was restless, footsteps echoing, voices raised in distant arguments. He thought of Earth, of the leaders who had trusted him with this mission. They had sent him to speak of trade, not to stand before an alien court as a father. But destiny had not asked his permission. Morning came with heavy skies. The court was gathered in the grand hall once more. The nobles filled the sides, their eyes burning with suspicion and curiosity. The Empress sat upon her throne, regal and silent. The boy stood beside Elias, small yet steady. Guards lined the walls, their spears gleaming. The Empress rose and declared that the truth must now be spoken. The boy had human blood, a fact proven by science. The court must decide what it meant, but first, the human envoy would speak. She turned to Elias, her voice ringing like steel. "What claim do you make, Elias Gray?" Elias stepped forward, his boots echoing across the stone floor. His heart pounded, but his voice was strong. He told the court he had not come here to deceive, nor had he ever sought to stand in their politics. But the boy had chosen him, not with schemes or lies, but with a single word that no power could erase. "Father." He paused, letting the word settle in the hall. Then he spoke again. He told them humanity had survived countless struggles not because of strength alone, but because of bonds. Because humans chose family, even when blood did not tie them together. Because they protected the weak, even when the world called it foolish. "This child," Elias said firmly, "is my son by choice, and I will not deny him." The hall erupted. Some nobles shouted in outrage, their voices echoing like thunder. Others murmured with uncertain awe. A few even nodded, their eyes softening as though seeing something new. The guards tightened their circle, ready for violence, but no blades were drawn. The Empress raised her hand, and silence slowly returned. Her face was unreadable as she looked, between Elias and the boy. At last she spoke. "So it is spoken. The human claims the heir." Her words carried weight, binding as law. The nobles erupted again, half in fury, half in wonder. The boy clung to Elias's side, his small voice, barely heard above the storm. "Father," he whispered, steady and certain. Elias stood tall, feeling the eyes of an empire upon him. He knew this choice would not bring peace quickly. It would bring danger, rebellion, and perhaps war. But it also carried hope. Hope that an empire built on blood and fear might learn something new from humanity. Hope that a child born of two worlds could unite them instead of breaking them. The Empress struck the floor with her staff, silencing the court once more. "So it begins," she said. And Elias knew she was right. A storm had broken, and he was at its heart. The palace was restless, but a strange stillness hung in the air. News of Elias's declaration had spread like wildfire. Some nobles were angry, plotting secret revenge. Others whispered in corridors, debating whether the human's choice might bring something new to the Dominion. The Empress had ordered the guards to maintain strict control, but even she could feel the tension building, like a bowstring stretched too tight. Elias and the boy stood together in the grand hall, their presence a symbol of change. The child no longer clung to him out of fear, but with trust, as though he understood that whatever storm raged outside, Elias would not abandon him. The boy's scales glimmered in the soft sunlight streaming through the crystal windows, casting small reflections across the walls. His wide eyes met Elias's, filled with hope and certainty, and Elias felt a warmth he had not known he needed. The Empress rose slowly from her throne, the crown on her head catching the light. She addressed the court, her voice carrying authority and care. She acknowledged the truth of the boy's mixed heritage and declared that the child would remain the heir, regardless of blood. Some nobles gasped, others bristled, but no one spoke out. The weight of her decree silenced even the boldest critics. For the first time, the court saw a ruler willing to protect her child, not just her throne. Outside the hall, the palace guards moved quietly, observing whispers and murmurs. Factions shifted, unsure whether to rebel or to accept this new order. The city beyond the walls seemed to hold its breath. Word of the human in the palace had reached distant territories, and even alien empires were watching, curious and cautious. Elias felt the weight of it all pressing on him. He had not come here for this. He had come as an envoy, carrying messages of trade and peace. Instead, he found himself standing at the heart of an empire, protecting a child who had called him father. Yet, despite the danger, he felt a sense of purpose. For the first time in his life, he understood the full strength of what humans carried within them, the ability to choose family, to protect the young, and to stand by them against any odds. The child tugged at Elias's hand, drawing him back from his thoughts. His small voice spoke softly, but the word carried power across the hall. "Father." Elias knelt beside him, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I will protect you," he said, his voice steady, "no matter what happens." The boy nodded, leaning closer as if understanding every word. The Empress watched quietly, her expression unreadable. Then, with a small but decisive motion, she stood and declared a new council. Nobles who had once plotted against the child were now assigned roles that required loyalty and service. Some accepted, others protested quietly, but all had to comply. The Empress made it clear, the child's safety and future would not be compromised, and anyone who challenged that would face her full authority. In the following days, the palace slowly adjusted. Rumors and plots did not vanish completely, but a sense of cautious order returned. Nobles who had doubted Elias's intentions began to see the boy's bond with him as a symbol of strength rather than weakness. The child learned quickly from Elias, absorbing human ways of understanding and empathy alongside the rigorous lessons of a Tharkesh heir. In quiet moments, he would ask about Earth, its oceans, skies, and people, and Elias would answer patiently, teaching him not only words but the ideas of humanity. As weeks passed, other alien empires began to take notice. Messages arrived at the palace gates, some respectful, some cautious, all curious. The presence of human blood in the Dominion's air sparked interest, speculation, and in some cases, fear. Humanity was no longer just a distant planet. It was now intertwined with the future of a powerful alien empire. Elias stood beside the boy on the palace balcony one evening, watching the glowing city lights stretch across the horizon. He realized that the child's simple word had changed the course of history. One word spoken with trust and innocence had shifted loyalties, challenged traditions, and united two worlds in an unexpected way. The boy looked up at him and smiled, a small, bright smile that carried courage beyond his years. "Father," he said again, softly but firmly. Elias smiled back, feeling a deep bond that no court intrigue, no empire, and no distance could break. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and dangers, but he also knew they would face it together. For the first time, Elias understood the meaning of strength beyond warships and armies. It was in the bonds humans formed, the choices they made, and the love they protected fiercely. The child had chosen him, and in return he chose the child. That choice had shaken an empire, but it had also created hope. Hope that the Tharkesh could embrace change, that humanity's ideals could ripple across the stars, and that a child's voice could reshape the future. And so, in the heart of the palace that had once frozen at a single word, a new era began. One where human courage, empathy, and choice intertwined with the power of an alien empire. One where a child's innocent call of father had rewritten destinies and changed the galaxy forever. The palace no longer stood frozen. It was alive with possibility, trembling with uncertainty yet moving forward. And through it all, the boy's small hand remained in Elias's, a symbol that even in the greatest storms, the bonds of family, chosen or born, could not be broken. Hey, Galaxy was watching, and humanity had quietly, firmly entered the stage.